Coming up on the show today, we're going to take a long dive into some American history and world history as we talk about the battle that happened during World War II 80 years ago today. And then we're going to talk about how the League of Nations became to be about. The AGM 154A. 12 interesting facts about ghosts. We're going to take a look inside the history of the famous and my favorite Revolutionary War. We got some ghost stories for y'all tonight. And the founder of the Ouija board and how that became about. Tonight, it's Saturday, January 25th, 2025, and the Dark Forest is coming at you right now. Alright, what's up guys? Welcome back to the show. Today is January 25th, 2025, and it is a beautiful Saturday night here in wonderful Lynchburg, Virginia. As we sit down to take this wonderful dive into long American and world history. As you guys know, I am a history freak. I love history. I love to be involved in it. It's always something I've been passionate about. I love talking history. Anything history you can think of, I will be there to talk about. And tonight, we have some very, very cool and important pieces to go back and look at from times in our history. So, with that being said, we're going to start off tonight talking about the AGM 154A joint standoff weapon. So, this was first used in combat back in 1998 during Operation Desert Fox. The first use of this was on December 17th, 1998. As it was the first air-to-ground weapon that can be used to attack targets at night, during the day, and in bad weather. It was launched by an FA-18C from the USS Enterprise. It was used to strike targets in the southern suburbs of Baghdad. It was also used in the Operation Southern Watch, the NATO Operation Allied Force, the Operation Enduring Freedom, and Operation Iraq Freedom. It uses GPS and infrared guidance to target its enemy's positions. It can also, with the broach warhead that it has, it can penetrate fortified structures, and it clusters into munitions, as variants can attack up to soft targets like troop concentrations or even vehicle convoys. The AGM 154A was certified officially for operational use in December of 1998, like I said, and then it was actually first used on the 17th. Were also as the USS Carl Vinson's Air Wing first employed during combat over southern Iraq in 1999. Okay, guys, now we're going to take a look into the League of Nations. Now this is definitely a important part of history. If you don't know much about the League of Nations, keep your ears open and clearly listening, because there is a lot that we're going to talk about. Let's begin. So, if you don't know what the League of Nations is, well, it's an international diplomatic group developed after World War I as a way to solve disputes between countries before they erupted into open warfare. A precursor to the United Nations, the League achieved some victories but also had a mixed record of success, sometimes putting self-interest before becoming involved with the conflict resolution, while also contending with governments that did not recognize its authority. The League effectively ceased operations during World War II. So what was the League of Nations? Well, the League of Nations has its origins in the 14-point speech of President Woodrow Wilson, part of a presentation given in 1918, outlining his ideas for peace after the carnage of World War I. Well, Wilson envisioned an organization that was charged with resolving conflicts before they exploded into bloodshed and warfare. By December of that same year, Wilson left for Paris to transform his 14 points into what would become the Treaty of Versailles. 7 months later, he returned to the United States with a treaty that included the idea for what would become the League of Nations. Republican Congressman from Massachusetts, Henry Lodge, led a battle against the treaty. Lodge believed that both the treaty and the League undercut U.S. autonomy in international matters. Well, in response, Woodrow Wilson took the debate to the American people, embarking on a 27-day train journey to sell the treaty to live audiences, but cut his tour short due to exhaustion and sickness. Upon arriving back in Washington, D.C., Woodrow Wilson had a stroke. Congress did not ratify the treaty, and the United States refused to take part in the League of Nations. Isolationists and Congress feared it would draw the United States into international affairs unnecessarily. Well, in other countries, the League of Nations was a more popular idea. Under the leadership of Lord Cecil, the British Parliament created the Fillmore Committee as an exploratory body and announced support of it. French liberals followed, with the leaders of Sweden, Switzerland, Belgium, Greece, and other smaller nations responding in kind. In 1919, the structure and the process of the leagues were laid out in a covenant developed by all the countries taking part in the Paris Peace Conference. The League began organizational work in the fall of 1919, spending its first 10 months with a headquarters in London before moving to Geneva. The Covenant of the League of Nations went into effect on January 10, 1920, formally instituting the League of Nations. By 1920, 48 countries had joined. Well, the League struggled for the right opportunity to assert its authority. Secretary General Sir Eric Drummond believed that failure was likely to damage the burgeoning organization, so it was best not to insinuate itself into just any dispute. When Russia was not a member of the League, it attacked a port in Persia in 1920. Persia appealed to the League for help, but the League refused to take part, believing that Russia would not acknowledge their jurisdiction and that would damage the League's authority. Adding to the growing pains, some European countries had a hard time handing over autonomy when seeking help with disputes. There were situations in which the League had no choice but to get involved. From 1919 to 1935, the League acted as a trustee of a tiny region between France and Germany called the Snar. The League became the 15-year custodian of the coal-rich era to allow it time to determine on its own of which of the two countries it wished to join, with Germany being the eventual choice. A similar situation happened in Danzig, which was set up as a free city by the Treaty of Versailles and became the center of a dispute between Germany and Poland. The League administered Danzig for several years before it fell back under German rule. As these disputes were solved by the League of Nations, Poland was in frequent distress, fearing for its independence against threats from neighboring Russia, which in 1920 occupied the city of Vilna and handed it over to Lithuanian allies. Following a demand that Poland recognize Lithuanian independence, the League became involved. Vilna was returned to Poland, but hostilities with Lithuania continued. The League was also brought in Poland and grappled with Germany about Upper Silesia and as over the town of Teschen. Other areas of dispute that the League got involved in, including the squabble between Finland and Sweden over the Åland Islands, disputes between Hungary and Romania, Finland's separate quarrels with Russia and Austria, a border argument between Albania and Greece, and the tussle between France and England over Morocco. In 1923, following the murder of Italian General Enrico Tellini and his staff within the borders of Greece, Benito Mussolini retaliated by bombing and invading the Greek island Corfu. Greece requested the League's help, but Mussolini refused to work with it. The League was left on the sidelines watching as the dispute was solved instead by the Conference of Ambassadors, an allied group that was later made part of the League. The incident at Petrich followed 2 years later, as it's unclear precisely how the debacle in the border town of Petrich in Bulgaria started, but it resulted in the deaths of a Greek captain in retaliation from Greece in the form of invasion. Bulgaria apologized and begged the League for help. The League decreed a settlement that was accepted by both countries. But as time went on, the League of Nations also made larger efforts that include the Geneva Protocol devised in the 1920s to limit what is now understood as chemical and biological weaponry, and the World Disarmament Conference in the 1930s, which was meant to make disarmament a reality but failed after Hitler broke away from the conference and the League in 1933. In 1920, the League created its Mandates Commission, charged with protecting minorities, as its suggestions about Africa were treated seriously by France and Belgium, but ignored by South Africa. Now, in 1929, the Mandates Commission helped Iraq join the League. The Mandates Commission also got involved in tensions in Palestine between the incoming Jewish population and Palestinian Arabs. Though any hopes of sustaining peace, there was further complicated by Nazi persecution of the Jews, which led to a rise in immigration to Palestine. The League was also involved in the Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928, which sought to outlaw war. It was successfully adopted by over 60 countries. When put to the test when Japan invaded Mongolia in 1931, the League proved incapable of enforcing the pact. Now, after World War II broke out, most members of the League were not involved, so the League of Nations eventually ended up failing. How it failed? Let's find out. When World War II broke out, members of the League were not involved and claimed neutrality, but members France and Germany were immediately impacted. In 1940, League members Denmark, Norway, Luxembourg, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France all fell to Hitler. Switzerland became nervous about hosting an organization perceived as an allied one, and the League began to dismantle its offices. Soon the Allies endorsed the idea of the United Nations, which held its first planning conference in San Francisco in 1944, effectively ending any need for the League of Nations to make a post-war return. And with that, the League of Nations eventually turned into the United Nations. So that was a very cool piece of important history. I've always loved to learn about the League of Nations. That was a big thing for me in history class. The League of Nations, anything like that involved, like World War II, peace treaties, anything like that, really interested me and still interests me to this day. And I still research and try to learn more on things that we didn't always talk about in history class, that I can go back and talk about now and find out more. So the League of Nations is always a big thing for me. But with that, that's the League of Nations, a very key part of history that happened between the World Wars and ending of World War II. Now, as we go towards the end of World War II, 80 years ago to this day, in January 25th, 1945, the Battle of the Bulge officially ended. As this was called the greatest American battle of the war by Winston Churchill, the Battle of the Bulge in the Ardennes region of Belgium was Adolf Hitler's last major offensive in World War II against the Western Front. Hitler's aim was to split the Allies in their drive toward Germany, but the German troops' failure to divide Britain, France, and America with the Ardennes offensive paved the way to victories for the Allies. Lasting 6 brutal weeks from December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945, the assault, also called the Battle of the Ardennes, took place during frigid weather conditions, with some 30 German divisions attacking battle-fatigued American troops across 85 miles of the densely wooded Ardennes forest. As the Germans drove into the Ardennes, the Allied line took on the appearance of a large bulge, giving rise to the battle's name. The battle proved to be the costliest ever fought by the U.S. Army, which suffered over 100,000 casualties. The formerly serene, wooded region of the Ardennes was hacked into chaos by fighting as the Americans dug into the German advance at St. Vith, Elsborn Ridge, Houffalize, and later Bastogne, which was defended by the 101st Airborne Division. The surprise German attack broke through the front on day one, as stories quickly spread of massacred soldiers and civilians. For those who had lived through 1940, the picture was all too familiar. Belgian townspeople put away their Allied flags and brought out the swastikas. Police in Paris enforced an all-night curfew. British veterans waited nervously to see how the Americans would react to a full-scale German offensive, and British generals quietly acted to safeguard the Meuse River's crossings. Even American civilians who had thought final victory was near were sobered by the Nazi onslaught. Now, as this battle went on, it was frigid cold. Like, it was one of the coldest battles in history. Hitler's mid-December timing of the attack, one of the bloodiest of the war, was strategic, as freezing rain, thick fog, and deep snow drifts and record-breaking low temperatures brutalized the American troops. More than 15,000 cold injuries, trench foot, pneumonia, frostbite were reported that winter. But Nazis, on the other hand, sent in imposters and changed road signs. Now this was a big part for the Germans, as they changed road signs and spread misinformation to help them gain advantage on the mission to come after U.S. troops. So let's find out more about it. Here we go. Another Nazi strategy was to attempt to infiltrate the Allied troops. Veteran Vernon Brantley, a private first class in the 289th Regiment, told the Fort Jackson leader that his unit had just arrived in Germany from France when they were told to load up and return to Luxembourg. We got word that the Germans had dropped a lot of paratroopers behind our lines, and they were dressed like American soldiers and spoke English, as they were there to create confusion. Whereas the Germans also changed road signs and spread misinformation. The Nazis were carefully groomed for their dangerous mission. They spoke excellent English, and their slang had been tuned up by the close association with American prisoners of war in the German concentration camps. Under the rules of the Hague Convention, these Germans were classifiable as spies and subject to an immediate court-martial by a military tribunal. After brief deliberation, American officers found them guilty and ordered the usual penalty for spies, death by firing squad. To stop these infiltrators, the U.S. troops would ask suspected Germans to answer American trivia questions. So that was also another part, too, that made this battle so important, was that the Germans would take American prisoners and use them as spies to get advantage over the American troops. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But as we go along in this battle, we come to Christmas Day. It wasn't until Christmas Day that the weather conditions finally cleared, allowing Allied air forces to strike. It was on that bright, clear, cold Christmas morning in 1944 that the ground froze solid. The tanks and air forces could finally maneuver and get assistance to all of us who were previously blocked off. It was a welcome sign to see the sun come up. It meant that we were alive for one more day. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, and Lieutenant General George Patton, Jr. led the American defense to restore the front. Eisenhower gave Patton the Third Army, which included about 230,000 soldiers, and ordered him to head to the Ardennes. Now, as the 101st Airborne Division arrived in Bastogne, the Germans surrounded thousands of Allied troops. However, in response, Eisenhower sent in this famed 101st Airborne Division. When the Germans sent a message demanding the surrender of the 101st on December 22nd, they got a one-word response from its commander, General Anthony McAuliffe: nuts. This was interpreted by German officers as a more colorful and negative response to their demand. The day after Christmas, units of Patton's rapidly approaching Third Army finally arrived, broke through the German lines, and rescued the troops. Claiming victory of the battle on January 25, 1945, 80 years ago today, the Allies headed for Berlin. The war ended less than 5 months later with Germany's May 7th surrender. 1 million plus Allied troops, including some 500,000 Americans, fought in the Battle of the Bulge, with approximately 19,000 soldiers killed in action, 47,500 wounded, and 23,000 plus missing. About 100,000 Germans were killed, wounded, or captured. And that's one of the coldest, most gruesomest battles of World War II. Amazes me to this day how much our American troops went through to claim that victory of this battle. That was a lot. And that's just one battle. There's many more as it led up all the way to May 7th when the Germans and Hitler finally decided to surrender. But World War II, that was a big time in our history. All the battles. Now we move on to another very important part in our history. This is one war that I always love to research and love to talk about anytime I get the chance. This is one that I always enjoyed. And one that will always stick with us as important pieces of American history. Otherwise known as the American Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War between 1775 and 1783, also known as the American Revolution, arose from growing tensions between residents of Great Britain's 13 North American colonies and the colonial government, which represented the British Crown. Skirmishes between British troops and colonial militiamen in Lexington and Concord in April 1775 kicked off this armed conflict, and by the following summer the rebels were waging a full-scale war for their independence. France entered the American Revolution on the side of the colonists in 1778, turning what had essentially been a civil war into an international conflict. After French assistance helped the Continental Army force the British surrender at Yorktown in 1781, the Americans had effectively won their independence, though fighting did not formally end until 1783. Now, for more than a decade before the outbreak of the American Revolution in 1775, tensions had been building between the colonists and the British authorities. Before then, the French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War from 1756 to 1763, brought new territories under the power of the Crown. But the expensive conflict led to new and unpopular taxes. Attempts by the British government to raise revenue by taxing the colonies, notably the Stamp Act of 1765, the Townshend Act of 1767, and then the Tea Act of 1773, met with heated protest among many colonists who resented their lack of representation in Parliament and demanded the same rights as other British subjects. Colonial resistance led to violence in 1770 when British soldiers opened fire on a mob of colonists, killing 5 men in what was known as the Boston Massacre. After December 1773, when a band of Bostonians altered their appearance to hide their identity, boarded British ships, and dumped 342 chests of tea into the Boston harbor during the Boston Tea Party, an outraged Parliament passed a series of measures known as the Intolerable or Corrosive Acts, designed to reassert imperial authority in Massachusetts. In response, a group of colonial delegates, including George Washington, John and Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, and John Jay, met in Philadelphia in September 1774 to give voice to their grievances against the British Crown. This First Continental Congress did not go so far as to demand independence from Britain, but it denounced taxation without representation, as well as the maintenance of the British Army in the colonies without their consent. It issued a declaration of the rights due every citizen, including life, liberty, property, assembly, and trial by jury. The Continental Congress voted to meet again in May 1775 to consider further action, but by that time, violence had already broken out. On the night of April 18, 1775, hundreds of British troops marched from Boston to nearby Concord, Massachusetts, in order to seize an armed cat. Paul Revere and other writers sounded the alarm, and colonial militiamen began mobilizing to intercept the redcoats. On April 19th, local militiamen clashed with British soldiers in the battles of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts, marking the shot heard around the world that signified the start of the American Revolutionary War. Alright, as we continue, now 1770, now we're entering still between 1775 and 1776. This is when the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia. Delegates, including new additions Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, voted to form a Continental Army with Washington as its commander-in-chief. On June 17th, in the Revolution's first major battle, colonial forces inflicted heavy casualties on the British regiment of General William Howe at Breed's Hill in Boston. The engagement, known as the Battle of Bunker Hill, ended in a British victory but lent encouragement to the revolutionary cause. Throughout that fall and winter, Washington's forces struggled to keep the British contained in Boston, but artillery captured at Fort Ticonderoga in New York helped shift the balance of that struggle in late winter. The British evacuated the city in March of 1776, with Howe and his men retreating to Canada to prepare a major invasion of New York. By 1776, in June, with the Revolutionary War in full swing, a growing majority of the colonists had come to favor independence from Britain. On July 4th, the Continental Congress voted to adopt the Declaration of Independence, drafted by a five-man committee including Franklin and John Adams, but written mainly by Thomas Jefferson. That same month, determined to crush the rebellion, the British government sent a large fleet along with more than 34,000 troops to New York in August. Howe's redcoats routed the Continental Army on Long Island. Washington was forced to evacuate his troops from New York City by September. Pushed across the Delaware River, Washington fought back with a surprise attack in Trenton, New Jersey on Christmas night, and won another victory at Princeton to revive the rebels' flagging hopes before making winter's quarters at Morristown. Now, as we move into 1777 and 1778, we have now reached the turning point in the Revolutionary War, known as the Battle of Saratoga. British strategy in 1777 involved two main prongs of attack aimed at separating New England, where the rebellion enjoyed the most popular support from the other colonies. To that end, General John Burgoyne's army marched south from Canada toward a planned meeting with Howe's forces on the Hudson River. His men dealt a devastating loss to the Americans in July by retaking Fort Ticonderoga, while Howe decided to move his troops southward from New York to confront Washington's army near the Chesapeake Bay. The British defeated the Americans at Brandywine Creek, Pennsylvania, on September 11th and entered Philadelphia on September 25th. Washington rebounded to strike Germantown in early October before withdrawing to winter quarters near Valley Forge. Howe's move had left Burgoyn's army exposed near Saratoga, New York, and the British suffered the consequences of this on September 19th when an American force under General Horatio Gates defeated them at Freeman's Farm in the First Battle of Saratoga. After suffering another defeat on October 7th at Bemis Heights, the Second Battle of Saratoga, Burgoyne surrendered his remaining forces on October 17th. The American victory at Saratoga would prove to be a turning point of the American Revolution as it prompted France to enter the war openly on the American side, though it would not formally declare war on Great Britain until June 1778. The American Revolution, which had begun as a civil conflict between Britain and its colonies, had become a world war. Now, moving on between 1778 and 1781, the stalemate in the North, the battle in the South. During the long, hard winter at Valley Forge, Washington's troops benefited from the training and discipline of the Prussian military officer Baron Frederick von Steuben, sent by the French and the leadership of the French Marquis de Lafayette on June 28, 1778, as British forces under Sir Henry Clinton attempted to withdraw from Philadelphia to New York. Washington's army attacked them near Monmouth, New Jersey, as the battle effectively ended as a draw, as the Americans held their ground, but Clinton was able to get his army and supplies safely to New York. On July 8th, a French fleet commanded by the Comte d'Estaing arrived off the Atlantic coast ready to do battle with the British. A joint attack on the British at Newport, Rhode Island, in late July failed, and for the most part the war settled into the stalemate phase in the North. The Americans suffered a number of setbacks from 1779 to 1781, including the defection of General Benedict Arnold to the British and the first serious Mennonites within the Continental Army. In the South, the British occupied Georgia by early 1779 and then later captured Charleston, South Carolina in May of 1780. British forces under Lord Charles Cornwallis then began an offensive in the region, crushing Gates' American troops at Camden in mid-August. Though the Americans scored a victory over Loyalist forces at Kings Mountain in early October, Nathanael Greene replaced Gates as the American commander in the South that December. Under Greene's command, General Daniel Morgan scored a victory against a British force led by the Colonel Banastre Tarleton at Cowpen, South Carolina on January 17, 1781. Now, as we start working our way to the end of the Revolutionary War, by the fall of 1781, Greene's American forces had managed to force Cornwallis and his men to withdraw to Virginia's Yorktown Peninsula, near where the York River empties into the Chesapeake Bay. Supported by a French army commanded by General Jean-Baptiste de Rochefort, I'm not going to pronounce that, Washington moved against Yorktown with a total of around 14,000 soldiers, while a fleet of 36 French warships offshore prevented British reinforcement or evacuation. Trapped and overpowered, Cornwallis was forced to surrender his entire army on October 19th. Claiming illness, the British general sent his deputy Charles O'Hara to surrender. After O'Hara approached to surrender his sword to Washington, Washington gave the nod to his own deputy Benjamin Lincoln, who accepted it. Though the movement for American independence effectively triumphed at the Battle of Yorktown, contemporary observers did not see that as the decisive victory yet. British forces remained stationed around Charleston, and the powerful main army still resided in New York. Though neither side would take decisive action over the better part of the next 2 years, the British removal of their troops from Charleston and Savannah in late 1782 finally pointed to the end of the conflict. British and American negotiators in Paris signed preliminary peace terms in Paris later that year in November, and on September 3, 1783, Great Britain formally recognized the independence of the United States in the Treaty of Paris. At the same time, Britain signed separate peace treaties with France and Spain, bringing the American Revolution to a close after 8 long years. Now, when you talk about American history, the Revolutionary War was a key factor in our history. That's what officially declared our independence from Great Britain. And without all our troops, founding fathers, Washington, Franklin, Jefferson, all our generals, John Adams, Samuel Adams, all of them, we would not be where we are today. This was the very important part that made America who we are today, as we officially got our independence from Great Britain. Now, we're going to move on into now getting into the horror side of things a little bit to finish off tonight's podcast. We're going to take a look into a very cool piece of history that many of you may not know about. But here we go. On Saturday, January 23rd, 1847, Confederate veteran lawyer and inventor Elijah Jefferson Bond, best known as the patentee of the Ouija board, was born at the town of Bel Air in Hartford County, Maryland. Although Bond invented and patented several different items, including a steam boiler, he is best remembered for patenting what became known as a Ouija board on May 28, 1890. The patent was granted on February 3, 1891. Bond later sold the U.S. distribution rights for the Ouija board to the Kenner Novelty Company. In 1966, the Ford family sold the rights to the Ouija board trademark to Parker Brothers, who then sold the trademark to Hasbro in 1991. The popular belief that the word Ouija comes from a combination of the French and German words for yes is a misconception. The name was taken from a word spelled out on the board when its inventor asked a supposed ghost to name it. Wow. Some of y'all may not know that, but that, to me, horror and a Ouija board, that's a cool key piece of history on how all of that become and what we know today as a Ouija board. So now we're going to take a dive into some interesting facts about ghosts. Number 1, the United States is the most haunted country in the world. According to a study, the United States is the most haunted place in the world, followed by the United Kingdom. This is based on the number of reported ghost and UFO sightings in haunted historical places. The U.S. achieved an overall score of 32 out of 40, while the U.K. came in second place with a score of 28. If there is one place you should visit if you want to experience all things spooky, Salem in Massachusetts is it. Now, most of you probably know about Salem. Salem is where they had all the witch trials and all that, as it's home to some of the most famous sites in the U.S., including the Witch House, the Old Burying Point, and the House of the Seven Gables. Number 2 is the first Queen of England is known as Bloody Mary. Alright, so now as we talk about Bloody Mary, this is also in connection with the game, if you know the game. There are many superstitions about mirrors, but legend has it that if you say Bloody Mary 3 times in the mirror, she will appear and tell you your future. Even though she is simply a fortune-telling spirit in some cultures, in others she is an evil entity. Mary I of England became known as Bloody Mary because how she was responsible for brutally burning hundreds of Protestant heretics at the stake. She is also responsible for executing Lady Jane Grey, which brought her short 9-day reign as queen to an abrupt end. Number 3 is that the Romans believed you could use ghosts for revenge. For many years, the Romans believed that you could get a ghost to enact revenge on your enemies by scratching a curse into a stone tablet. The curse needed to include your enemy's name and should describe how you wanted them to be tormented. You would then place the stone on a grave or burial site to encourage the deceased to carry out the curse. Number 4 is famous Abraham Lincoln still reportedly haunts the White House. Since Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in 1865, he has been seen wandering the halls of the White House. However, it doesn't end there. He is also seen at his former residence in Springfield, Illinois, including his former law office. The Lincoln bedroom and the yellow oval room on the second floor of the White House are said to be the most active. Even the dogs who reside in this famous building are said to react to Lincoln's spirit. Number 5, and one that we all know very well and very true. It does have its advantages, I'll put it this way, but dealing with the paranormal, you know that when a place is haunted, it's going to be haunted during the day and it's going to be haunted at night. But a lot of people say that ghosts are more active at night for certain reasons. Here are some of them reasons. Have you ever wondered why ghost hunters conduct their investigations at night, or why the worst scenes from ghost movies take place in the dark? Well, most of the ghost sightings you've seen or heard of take place at night because there are fewer electronic disturbances. At night, appliances are usually turned off and lights aren't producing energy, making the ghosts more powerful and allows them to produce and give out more energy. Like I've always said, I've been in the paranormal field 5 years, going on 6. If you go to a haunted place and you get activity, if you know it's a haunted place, it's going to be haunted during the day and it's going to be haunted at night. Yes, you may get more activity at night because, like I said, you have less electromagnetic frequencies, less disturbances in the air, like stuff like that. They have more ways to gain more energy and making them more powerful than they do during the day. But I've also seen plenty of things that have happened in broad daylight. So if a place is haunted, just know it's going to be haunted at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and it's going to be haunted at 2 o'clock in the morning. You just might get more activity at 2 o'clock in the morning than 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But as we move on from this, ghosts also have different motives. So Sigmund Freud once described ghosts as a projection of mental entities into the external world. However, today we know that a ghost is a dead person who once walked the earth. So it only makes sense that they have their own motives based on their experiences. A ghost's motives are specific to their needs. Some spirits simply just want to be acknowledged, like, hey, I'm here. Others will encourage you to take action to help them move on. Like, I'll put it this way. Like, say you have somebody that's being tortured by an unknown spirit, and that You go conducting the investigation, come to find out the spirit wants to cross over but can't cross over on its own. So you go through the process to help them cross over. Because if they can't cross over on their own, they're just going to stay where they are and do what they've been doing and possibly torture the homeowner or place that they're in. So the ghost will recognize that you're there and to help them cross over. And once again, crossing over is a big part to the paranormal field, because for the spirits that don't know how to go towards the light, that can't cross over, that want to cross over, when you are there, they get your attention. They want your help to cross over. They want to go towards the light. They just can't do it themselves. They need that extra step, extra oomph in you that you have to make them and help them go into the light. That's how I see it. Paranormal doesn't always have to be bad. Yes, you run into your demonic entities. You run into your evils. You run into your main everyday home spirits. But the good side of the paranormal is helping them cross over. Being on the bad side of the paranormal has some very bad influences on other things, such as your life, other things that you can't get out of. If you stay on the good side of the paranormal and help the spirits cross over, you're helping the spirits cross over, go into the light, but you're also helping yourself, showing as like you did a good deed to help somebody cross over that can't on their own. You help them go into the light where they want to be and where they can be peaceful and be at rest, and not on the other side where they've been their whole life ever since they passed away. Now that they have the opportunity to cross over, they want your help to get there. So with that being said, that's a lot of ghosts have different motives. Some of them may not want to cross over at that time, and that's okay. They may want to cross over at a later time, or they may not want to cross over at all. Some spirits are like that and stubborn and don't want to go towards light. But most of them they want to be at peace and want to be at rest, so they want to cross over. Like I said, some of them can't cross over on their own, so you have to help them go towards light and help them cross over. As we go on to fact number 7, this is an old one. I didn't know much about this, but now that I've read up on it some more, the actual first ghost story dates back to 1500 BCE. Now, a small clay tablet which can fit into the palm of your hand is said to depict one of the first ghost stories. The story on the tablet is about an exorcism from Babylon in 1500 BCE. The odd thing about this tablet is that you can only see the imagery and text when you look at it from above under a light. This ancient tablet is currently being held in the collections of the British Museum but has never been exhibited. The last text line on the tablet urges the viewer to not look behind you. Number 8 is some ghosts are living in a permanent nightmare. There are ghosts out there who don't realize that they have died, which means they're permanently confused about where they are and can't understand why people cannot see them. These are the entities who will often become frustrated and start finding ways to move things around in an effort to be acknowledged. They will also do this out of boredom. Like I said earlier, some ghosts will find things and do things to get your attention if they're confused about where they are. If they're confused about where they are and can get your attention, a lot of investigators will ask the spirits if they want to cross over and go towards the light. If the spirit says yes, sometimes the spirits will do it on their own. And like I said, some just don't. They will not go on their own. You have to get in there and help them go towards the light. Make them feel like make them realize what the light is and show them that the good is on the other side of that light, and make them want to go, to be peace, to be at peace, to be at rest, and not be distraught and confused anymore. Number 9, not all hauntings can be intelligent. There are two types of hauntings, intelligent and residual. A residual haunting is often linked to a traumatic event or death, which a ghost lives through over and over again, as they're generally not even aware of the surroundings at all. With a residual haunting, a ghost won't try to interact with you. Instead, it will be like reliving a nightmare, not knowing how to move on. There again, brings up my point from not being able to cross over. If they're living in this residual haunting and trying to relive a nightmare that happened, or possibly how they passed away, they don't know how to move on their own. You have to help them go towards the light. Make them see what's on the other side of that light. Make them see the good side. Make them see the happiness, the peace. Let them show them that you can be at rest on the other side, not having to worry and relive what happened on how you died. Let them go into the light, onto the other side, so they can be at peace and don't have to relive what they're going through anymore. Number 10, ghosts retain the emotions they had as humans. One of the reasons why it's possible to have different experiences with ghosts is because they retain the same emotions they were experiencing right before they died. If they died peacefully, they would often come across as such. However, if they die painfully or suddenly, they tend to come across as distraught, angry, and confused, which most of the time is when you'll see poltergeist activities start to occur. Number 11. This involves Einstein. One of the smartest, most logical men in the world believes that ghosts were real. As a scientist, he understood that energy is constant and cannot be destroyed. He also knew that it was possible for energy to transform, which is how he believed that ghosts are able to manifest. Number 12. Ghosts never sleep. Ghosts are a form of energy, which means there's no need for them to sleep. Even though you're most likely to only see them at night, this doesn't mean that they're not around during daylight hours. Like I said, if a haunted place is haunted, it's going to be haunted at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and it's going to be haunted at 2 o'clock in the morning. You just might get more activity at 2 o'clock in the morning versus when you would at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Their energy can be weaker during the daytime due to the electronic interferences and all that, but you can still experience the paranormal. I've gone into places where it's been broad daylight and I've had things thrown at me, and then I've had places where I've gone in during broad daylight and nothing happens. And we go back later that night and all hell breaks loose. So it's just how the ghosts feel when you're there. Because I'll tell you right there, when you go into a place, don't expect to get something every time. Ghosts and spirits, they're not there for your entertainment. They're there for them. When they want to show you something, they will do it on their own time, not when you want them to do it. They will do it on their own time. And most of the time, it's when you're least expecting it. As I've always said, doing the paranormal, expect the unexpected. Now, we're going to finish tonight's episode off with some more ghost stories and take a deep dive into what actually is a ghost. So with that being said, I hope you guys are ready for this to find out more information about these ghosts and what they really are. So, since ancient times, ghost stories, tales of spirits who return from the dead to haunt the places they left behind have figured prominently in the folklore of many cultures around the world. A rich subset of these tales involve historical figures ranging from queens and politicians to writers and gangsters, many of whom died early, violent, or mysterious deaths. So, as we dive in, what is a ghost? The concept of a ghost, also known as a specter, is based on the ancient idea that a person's spirit exists separately from his or her body and may continue to exist after that person dies. Because of this idea, many societies began to use funeral rituals as a way of ensuring that the dead person's spirit would not return to haunt the living. Places that are haunted are usually believed to be associated with some occurrence or emotion in the ghost's past. They are often a former home or place where he or she died. Aside from actual ghostly apparitions, traditional signs of haunting range from strange noises, lights, odors, or breezes to the displacement of objects, bells that ring spontaneously, or musical instruments that seem to play on their own. As early ghost sightings come about, in the 1st century AD, the great Roman author and statesman Pliny the Younger recorded one of the first notable ghost stories in his letters, which became famous for their vivid account of life during the heyday of the Roman Empire. Pliny reported that the specter of an old man with a long beard, rattling chains, was haunting his house in Athens. The Greek writer Lucian and Pliny's fellow Roman Plautus also wrote memorable ghost stories. Centuries later, in AD 856, the first poltergeist, a ghost that causes physical disturbances such as loud noises or objects falling or even being thrown around, was reported at a farmhouse in Germany. The poltergeist tormented the family living there by throwing stones and starting fires, among other things. Now, as we move into some of the more historical aspects of ghosts, these are 3 famous historical ghost spirits that have been seen around. One of the most frequently reported ghost sightings in England dates back to the 16th century. Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII and mother of Queen Elizabeth I, was executed at the Tower of London in May 1536 after being accused of witchcraft, treason, incest, and adultery. Sightings of her ghost have been reported at the tower as well in various other locations, including her childhood home Hever Castle in Kent. America's own rich tradition of historical ghosts began with one of its most illustrious founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin. Beginning in the late 19th century, Franklin's ghost was seen near the library of the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Some reports held that the statue of Franklin in front of the society comes to life and dances in the street. Though many ghost sightings have been reported at the White House in Washington, D.C. over the years, perhaps no political figure has made so frequent an appearance in the afterlife as Abraham Lincoln. The nation's 16th president, who was killed by an assassin's bullet in April of 1865, Lincoln, formerly a lawyer and congressman from Illinois, is said to have been seen wandering near the old Springfield Capitol building, as well as its nearby law offices. At the White House, everyone from first ladies to queens to prime ministers have reported seeing the ghost or feeling the presence of Honest Abe, particularly during the administration of Franklin D. Roosevelt, another president who guided the country through a time of great upheaval and war. Now, haunted places are a very important aspect when it comes to ghosts. This is where the ghosts stay and haunt and torture the people there. Some locations simply seem to lend themselves to hauntings, perhaps due to the dramatic or grisly events that occurred there in the past. Over the centuries, sightings of spectral armies have been reported on famous battlefields around the world, including important battle sites from the English Civil War in the 17th century. The bloody Civil War battlefield of Gettysburg and the World War I sites of Gallipoli near Turkey and the Somme, northern France. Another particularly active center for paranormal activity is the HMS Queen Mary, a cruise ship built in 1936 for the Cunard White Star Line. After serving in the British Royal Navy during World War II, the 81,000-ton ship retired in Long Beach, California in 1967. The plan was to turn it into a floating luxury hotel and resort. Since then, the Queen Mary has become notorious for its spectral presences. With more than 50 ghosts reported over the years, the ship's last chief engineer, John Smith, reported hearing unexplained sounds and voices from the area near the ship's bow, and almost the same location as a doomed British aircraft cruiser, the Kuroko, had pierced a hole when it sank after an accidental wartime crash that killed more than 300 sailors aboard. Smith also claimed to have encountered the ghost of Winston Churchill, or at least his spectral cigar smoke, in the Prime Minister's old stateroom aboard the ship. Many visitors to the Queen Mary have reported seeing a phantom crew member in blue overalls walking the decks. Around the ship's swimming pool, reports have been made of mysterious splashes and ghostly women in old-fashioned bathing suits or dresses, along with trails of wet footsteps appearing long after the pool had been drained. Among major cities, New York is especially rich with ghost stories. The spirit of Peter Stuyvesant, the city's last Dutch colonial governor, has been seen stomping around the East Village on his wooden leg since shortly after his death in 1672. The author Mark Twain is believed to haunt the stairwell of his one-time village apartment building, while the ghost of poet Dylan Thomas is said to sometimes occupy his usual corner table at the West Village's White Horse Tavern, where he drank a fatal 18 shots of scotch in 1953. Perhaps the most famous New York ghost is that of Aaron Burr, who served as vice president under Thomas Jefferson, but is best known for killing Alexander Hamilton in a duel in 1804. Burr's ghost is said to roam the streets of his old neighborhood, also the West Village, Burr's spectral activity is focused particularly on one restaurant, one if by land, two if by sea, which is located in a Barrow Street building that was once Burr's Carriage House. And that is some historical ghost stories and what are ghosts and what they became to be of. So, that being said, there is a lot of ghost stories out there that nobody probably knows about, that we have no documentation on, no witnesses, nothing in writing, nothing in books, nothing in the history books. It's just still floating out there that is yet to be discovered. And maybe over time, we will discover them. Or maybe they'll just be lost floating in the air, never to be heard of, never to be found. But hope you guys enjoyed this episode. As the first half of the episode, we took a good deep dive into some American history. And then the last half talked about some ghost stories and historical facts on that. So I hope you guys have enjoyed your day so far. Thank you guys for sticking with me throughout this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll have a lot more to talk about next week as we move into the 1st of February. February is going to be a good month. A lot of good stuff we have to talk about in February. A lot of cool historical facts. A lot of good ghost stories that happened in February. There's a lot to talk about. I hope you guys will stay tuned and keep on with me through these podcasts. I have a lot to talk about. Do one episode a week. Usually I'd say every Saturday we'll post the episode. 7 p.m. Eastern Time. But that's going to do it for tonight's episode. Like I said, hope you guys enjoyed this one. Hope you guys learned some stuff if you didn't know any of it already. But until next week, I'm going to sign off here, and I will catch you guys on the next episode.